Why does everyone hate the engagement ring I chose? When I proposed, my girlfriend Charlotte slumped to the floor and started crying, screaming yes over and over while jumping into my arms and running in circles. But then she saw the ring up close as I was putting it on her, and her face turned sour. She still let me put it on her finger, but her hand was shaking and she kept staring at it like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. On the drive home, she kept her ring hand covered in her lap, instead of admiring the ring like I'd expected. And when I asked if she liked it, she said, "I just can't believe you picked this," in this weird, hollow voice. I thought maybe she was just overwhelmed by the proposal, but when we got home, she immediately took the ring off and put it in the box, saying she didn't want to damage it. We almost had a fight over it when she almost forgot to put it back on the next morning. We went to brunch with our parents, and that's when her mom saw it. She literally gasped. Her dad didn't even seem happy or say congratulations, just asked if I was trying to make some kind of statement. When I said no, I just thought it was beautiful, he exchanged this look with his wife like they were communicating telepathically. Charlotte's mom pulled her aside and I heard her whisper, "You don't have to go through with this," which made no sense because they'd always loved me. Charlotte posted our engagement announcement on social media, but cropped out the photo of the ring saying the lighting wasn't good. When her friends asked to see it in the comments, she kept making excuses about waiting to get professional photos taken. Her best friend Mia came over that night, and when Charlotte showed her the ring, Mia just said, "Oh my God, he actually did that," and left without even congratulating us. I posted in 3 different wedding forums asking for advice about why everyone was acting strange about the ring, and included detailed photos from every angle. Every single post got deleted within minutes, and I was banned from 2 forums for obvious rage bait and trolling the community with offensive content. One moderator messaged me saying if the photos were real, I should be ashamed of myself. At work, I mentioned getting engaged, and my coworker asked to see the ring photo on my phone. She looked at it for about 2 seconds before handing my phone back like it was contaminated and saying, "That's certainly a choice." By lunch, everyone in the office was whispering, and my manager pulled me aside to say that while my personal life was my business, I should be mindful of professional boundaries. I went back to the jeweler thinking maybe there was something wrong. The jeweler remembered me and said he stood by his work, and the ring was exactly what I'd asked for with genuine materials and expert craftsmanship. When I asked if other customers had issues with similar designs, he said he'd never made another ring like this, and probably never would again. Charlotte started wearing the ring only when we were alone, and keeping it in the box whenever we went anywhere. When I confronted her, she said she just didn't want to lose it, but I could tell she was lying. Her sister saw it at family dinner and immediately said, "Please tell me that's not the real ring." And when Charlotte nodded, her sister actually left the table. I asked my mom what she thought, and when I showed her the picture, she went completely silent before asking if I'd bought it as a joke. When I said no, she asked if I'd been having mental health issues and suggested I see someone. Charlotte's friends started declining our wedding planning meetings, and her cousin who'd agreed to be a bridesmaid backed out saying she had scheduling conflicts. When we went to look at venues, the wedding coordinator saw the ring and asked if we were sure we wanted to move forward with booking. Charlotte started crying in the car afterward, saying she couldn't do this anymore. I begged her to just tell me what was wrong with the ring, but she kept saying if I couldn't see it myself, then that was the whole problem. I examined it under a magnifying glass looking for hidden symbols or offensive imagery, but it looked completely normal to me. I even had it appraised by a different jeweler who said it was worth exactly what I'd paid and was certainly unique but technically well made. After 2 months, Charlotte said she needed to talk and gave me the ring back. She said she'd tried to be okay with it because she loved me, but she couldn't marry someone who would think that ring was acceptable. She said her friends and family had staged an intervention, asking her what kind of person would give that ring, and she couldn't defend me anymore. When I asked one last time what was wrong with it, she just shook her head and said, "The fact that you genuinely don't know makes this so much worse." She left and blocked my number, and when I tried to sell the ring online, the listing got flagged and removed within hours. Even pawn shops wouldn't take it, with one owner saying he didn't want that kind of energy in his store. I kept the ring in my apartment and looked at it every single day, trying to understand what everyone else saw that I didn't see. It was literally a classic oval-shaped diamond, with small sapphires around the band, because blue was Charlotte's favorite color. I thought it was just a beautiful normal ring, but I had no idea how wrong I was. The next morning, I woke up with the ring box still on my nightstand, where I'd been staring at it before falling asleep. I grabbed my phone and set up a makeshift photo studio on my kitchen table, using a white sheet as backdrop. I took photos from every possible angle using the macro lens setting. Top view, side view, 3/4 angles, close-ups of the sapphires, the prongs, the band itself. I uploaded all 47 photos to my laptop and zoomed in on each one. The oval diamond sparkled perfectly in the center. The 12 small sapphires were evenly spaced around the band. The white gold setting looked elegant and classic to me. I opened Excel and started building a spreadsheet to track every reaction I'd gotten so far. Column A for the person, column B for their exact words if I could remember them, column C for their physical reaction, column D for any patterns I could identify. Charlotte's mom gasping and whispering about not going through with it. Her dad asking about making a statement. Mia saying, "Oh my God, he actually did that," before leaving. The forum moderator calling it offensive content. My coworker treating my phone like it was contaminated. the pawn shop owner refusing it because of its energy. 23 separate negative reactions logged and color-coded by severity. The data showed complete universal disgust, but absolutely no clear explanation of what specifically was wrong. My phone rang while I was adding more entries, and I saw it was my dad calling. He told me Mom had called him crying about the ring situation and asked me to send him the photos I'd taken. I emailed him the whole folder and stayed on the line while he opened them on his computer. He went completely silent for almost 2 full minutes. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded strange and careful. He asked if I'd been under any unusual stress lately, or if maybe someone at the jewelry store had played a prank on me. I told him I'd designed it myself, and the jeweler just followed my specifications. He made this sound like he was trying not to be sick, and said we needed to have a serious conversation about my judgment and whether I needed professional help. After we hung up, I put the ring in its box and shoved it in my jacket pocket. I spent the rest of the day going to different coffee shops and stores around town. At each place, I'd order something small, then casually mention I'd just gotten engaged and ask if they wanted to see the ring. The barista at the first coffee shop looked at it for maybe 3 seconds before stepping backward and telling me I should leave. A woman at the bookstore actually gasped and covered her mouth with both hands. An older man at the hardware store looked at it, then looked at me like I was dangerous, and walked away without saying anything. By the 5th stop, people were literally backing away from me physically when I opened the box. I drove to a high-end jewelry store thinking maybe they'd give me a professional assessment. The employee behind the counter took one look at the open box and her whole face changed. She told me to leave immediately and said they don't serve people like me. When I asked what she meant and demanded an explanation, she reached for the phone and said she'd call security if I didn't leave right now. Her hand was actually shaking as she pointed at the door. That night, I tried a different approach and posted the ring photos on 3 general photography forums without mentioning it was an engagement ring. I titled the posts Vintage-Inspired Jewelry Design and Classic Oval Diamond with Sapphire Accents and waited for responses. Within 10 minutes, all 3 posts were flagged as inappropriate content. 2 forums sent me automatic warnings about posting offensive material. One banned me outright with a message saying hate symbols weren't tolerated in their community. The word hate made my stomach drop, but I still couldn't see anything resembling a symbol in the ring's design. At work the next day, I noticed my coworker who'd seen the ring photo had moved her desk all the way to the other side of our open office. When I walked past the break room, conversation stopped mid-sentence. I found out later that 3 different informal team meetings happened that week without anyone telling me about them. People would whisper when I walked by, then go silent when I looked their way. My manager avoided making eye contact during our weekly check-in. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte's mom. She wrote that she was praying for me to get help and that she was deeply worried about what kind of person she'd almost welcomed into her family. She said she'd always thought I was a good man, but the ring revealed something dark she'd never suspected. The message hit me like a physical punch and I had to sit down. I drove back to the original jeweler the next morning with the ring and the photos. I demanded answers about what he'd done to make everyone react this way. He pulled out the original CAD drawings I'd signed and approved. He pointed to each element showing me how he'd followed my specifications exactly. He admitted he probably should have questioned my choices or suggested alternatives, but said I'd been very insistent about the specific placement of the sapphires and the proportions I wanted. He kept looking at me with this mixture of pity and disgust. Back at my apartment that night, I got out paper and colored pencils and started tracing the ring's design from different angles. I drew it from above, from the side, at various tilted angles. I connected the sapphires with lines to see if they formed some pattern. I measured the spaces between them. I overlaid geometric shapes trying to find hidden symbols. No matter how I looked at it, I just saw an elegant oval diamond with small sapphires creating what looked to me like a beautiful vintage pattern. After 3 more hours of staring at my drawings, I finally admitted I needed professional help understanding this. So I searched online for independent jewelry appraisers and found Mustafa Graves, who had 5-star reviews and specialized in historical pieces. I called his shop and made an appointment for the next afternoon, telling myself that an expert with no connection to Charlotte or my family would give me an objective assessment. The next day, I drove to his shop in the older part of town, a small storefront wedged between an antique dealer and a used bookstore. I walked in with the ring box in my jacket pocket, my hand wrapped around it like I was carrying something radioactive. Mustafa was behind the counter examining a pocket watch through a jeweler's loupe, a tall, thin man with gray hair and careful hands. When I set the ring box on the counter and explained why I was there, he looked at me for a long moment before asking, "Is this some kind of test?" I told him no. I genuinely needed to understand what everyone else was seeing that I couldn't see. He opened the box slowly like he was defusing a bomb, and I watched his whole body tense up when he saw the ring. He picked it up with his tweezers instead of his fingers, turning it under the bright examination light while his jaw got tighter and tighter. He kept glancing up at me every few seconds like he was trying to figure out if I was dangerous or just completely clueless. His hands were steady, but I could see he was uncomfortable, handling the ring like it might contaminate him somehow. After several long minutes of examination, where the only sound was the ticking of clocks on the wall, He set the ring down carefully on the velvet pad and pushed his glasses up on his forehead. He asked if I genuinely didn't know what I was looking at, his voice quiet but serious. I insisted I really didn't understand, that everyone kept acting like it was obvious, but I just saw a normal engagement ring with sapphires. He rubbed his face and said he needed my permission to be completely direct, because what he was about to show me might be upsetting. I told him I needed to know, that my whole life had fallen apart because of this ring, and I had to understand why. He pulled out a clean piece of white paper and a pencil, then picked up the ring again with the tweezers and set it down in front of him. He started sketching the ring from directly above, drawing the oval diamond in the center, and then carefully marking where each sapphire sat around the band. He numbered each stone and then started drawing the prongs that held them in place, making sure to get the exact angles right. When he finished the sketch, he set his pencil down and looked at me, then picked it up again and started drawing lines between certain stones and prongs. He connected 4 sapphires with straight lines, each one at a 90-degree angle to the next, and then he drew lines from the prongs that held them, extending outward at perfect 45-degree angles. My stomach started churning before my brain even processed what I was looking at. He traced the pattern with his finger, and suddenly I saw it, clear as day. The unmistakable shape of a swastika formed by the placement of the stones and the way the prongs were angled. The room started spinning and I had to grab the counter to stay upright. I felt all the blood drain from my face and my mouth went completely dry. I started arguing desperately that it wasn't intentional, that I just wanted sapphires around the band because blue was Charlotte's favorite color, that I had no idea the pattern would create that shape. Mustafa put his hand up to stop me and explained that intent doesn't matter when the impact is this clear, that most people recognize hate symbols instantly even in subtle forms, that our brains are wired to spot these patterns. He said once you see it, you can't unsee it, and that's why everyone had reacted so strongly. He pulled out his phone and showed me historical examples of how certain geometric patterns became permanently associated with hatred, how even accidental arrangements that create these shapes carry the weight of that history. He was gentle but firm about the reality of what I'd created, explaining that the 4-fold rotational symmetry combined with the extending arms created an unmistakable configuration that anyone would recognize immediately. He showed me other examples of innocent designs that had to be recalled or redesigned because they accidentally created offensive patterns. Companies that had lost millions because someone didn't catch these things in the design phase. He said the human brain is incredibly good at pattern recognition and that certain patterns are so deeply associated with evil that they trigger an immediate visceral response. I stumbled out of his shop in a complete daze, my legs barely working as I made it to my car. My mind was racing between crushing humiliation and anger at myself for being so blind to something everyone else saw immediately. I sat in my car for 20 minutes just staring at the steering wheel, replaying every horrible reaction in my mind, and finally understanding why people had looked at me with such disgust. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo of the ring, then grabbed a napkin from my glove compartment and a pen from the cup holder. I overlaid a grid on the photo using a photo editing app and started tracing the pattern myself, connecting the dots just like Mustafa had shown me. Now that I knew what to look for, the symbol jumped out at me from every angle, impossible to ignore, screaming from every photo I'd taken. I opened my messages and started drafting a long apology text to Charlotte, explaining that I finally understood, that I never meant to create that pattern, that I was horrified by what I'd done. I typed and deleted and typed again, trying to find words that could possibly make up for what I'd put her through. But when I hit send, the message bounced back immediately with the automated response that the number wasn't accepting messages, and that's when I remembered she'd blocked me weeks ago. The finality of that block hit different now that I understood what I'd done to her, making her wear a hate symbol on her finger, forcing her to show it to her family and friends, putting her in the position of having to defend me when I'd given her something so completely indefensible. That night I couldn't sleep, so I opened Instagram on my phone and searched for Charlotte's sister's profile. My hands were shaking as I typed out a message explaining that I finally understood what the ring looked like and that I never meant to create that pattern. I rewrote it 6 times trying to find the right words before hitting send at 3 in the morning. She read it immediately and started typing back, those 3 dots appearing and disappearing for what felt like forever. Her response came through in one long block of text, saying the real problem wasn't just the ring itself, but how I refused to believe anything was wrong when literally everyone was telling me. She said I made Charlotte question her own judgment and sanity by insisting everyone else was overreacting. She said that kind of dismissal was almost worse than the ring itself, because it showed I valued being right over listening to the person I claimed to love. The message ended with her saying she was glad I finally saw it, but the damage was already done. 2 days later, I had my first appointment with a therapist named Celeste Kerr, who my insurance covered. She had a small office downtown with plants everywhere, and one of those white noise machines outside the door. She asked me to start from the beginning, so I told her the whole story about the ring and how I couldn't see what everyone else saw. She took notes on a yellow pad and asked if this was the first time I'd missed social cues that seemed obvious to others. I thought about it and realized there had been other times at work when I'd said something that made people uncomfortable without understanding why. She asked about my childhood and whether I'd had trouble reading people's reactions growing up. We spent most of the session talking about pattern recognition and perspective taking rather than solutions. She said we'd need to work on building awareness of how my blind spots affected others before we could address the specific incident. The next morning at work, I opened my email to find a message from HR marked high priority. It was about mandatory sensitivity training on hate symbols and appropriate workplace conduct scheduled for that Friday. The email went to the entire department, but I knew it was because of me since the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. My coworkers kept glancing at me when they thought I wasn't looking, and conversations stopped when I walked by. I showed up to the training room 15 minutes early on Friday and sat in the back corner. The trainer was a woman named Jing Li who worked for an outside consulting firm. She started with a PowerPoint about the history of hate symbols and how they evolved over time. Then she showed slides of various symbols including subtle variations that people might not recognize immediately. When she got to the section about how these symbols can be accidentally incorporated into everyday designs, I felt my face burning. She showed examples of company logos that had to be changed and products recalled because someone didn't catch the pattern during design. She explained how the human brain is wired to recognize these patterns even when they're not intentional. I sank lower in my chair as she talked about the importance of getting multiple perspectives before finalizing any design. After the training ended, I waited for everyone else to leave, then approached my manager who was gathering his things. I apologized for the disruption I'd caused and said I understood if he needed to document this in my file. He looked tired as he acknowledged the apology, but made it clear my reputation had taken a serious hit that would take time to repair if it was even possible. He said trust was hard to rebuild once people formed certain impressions. That afternoon, I drove back to the original jeweler's shop with the ring in my pocket. The bell chimed when I walked in, and he looked up from his workbench with recognition, but not surprise. I asked him directly why he didn't warn me about what the pattern would create. He went to his filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder with my name on it. Inside were the CAD drawings I'd signed off on, and the email chain where I'd approved every detail. He pointed to his signature at the bottom of each page next to mine. He said he'd suggested several alternative designs, but I'd been insistent on my specific vision. He showed me where he'd even noted concerns about the symmetry, but I'd responded saying I knew what I wanted. Looking at those papers, I could see it now clear as day in the technical drawings. The 4 sapphires positioned exactly 90 degrees apart, with the prongs extending outward, created the unmistakable shape. Back at my apartment, I spent hours researching how to properly destroy the ring. I learned that melting down the metal and selling the stones separately was the only way to make sure it was completely gone. I called 6 different jewelers, but most refused to even handle it once I described what needed to be destroyed. One jeweler hung up on me, and another said he didn't want that kind of energy in his shop. Finally, I found someone willing to do it, but he insisted on complete dismantling with the metal melted immediately and the stones sold to different buyers across the country. He said he'd done this before for items with negative associations and understood the importance of total destruction. The process would take 2 weeks and cost almost as much as the ring itself, but I didn't care about the money. During my next therapy session, Celeste had me talk about other times I'd dismissed people's concerns because they conflicted with my perspective. We identified a pattern going back years where I needed to be right, even when multiple people told me I was wrong. She said this went deeper than just the ring incident and reflected a fundamental problem with how I processed feedback that challenged my worldview. I started to see how this pattern had affected my relationships and career without me realizing it. That weekend, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen and paper writing a letter to Charlotte's parents. I wrote 5 drafts before settling on one that took full responsibility without making excuses or asking for forgiveness. I acknowledged the pain I'd caused their daughter by making her wear something so offensive and then dismissing her feelings about it. I said I understood why they'd tried to protect her from someone who could be that blind to something so obvious. I mailed it without expecting a response because this wasn't about getting absolution, but about acknowledging the harm I'd caused. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with an email from Charlotte's dad. The message was 3 lines long and signed with just his initials instead of his usual "Love, Dad" that he'd used for years. He acknowledged getting my letter and asked that I not contact them again. The formal tone made my chest tight, but I understood. I deleted his number from my phone and removed the family photos from my apartment walls. That night, I went to the bookstore and bought 6 books about symbols and visual patterns. I stayed up until 4 in the morning reading about how certain shapes trigger instant recognition in the human brain. The books showed how specific geometric patterns became permanently linked to hatred and violence. I filled 3 notebooks with diagrams and notes trying to understand my blindness. My mom called saying she wanted to visit before the ring was destroyed. She drove 4 hours and arrived with homemade cookies like nothing had changed. I pulled out the ring box one last time and traced the pattern on paper for her. She watched my finger follow the lines that formed the shape, and her eyes filled with tears. She pulled me into a hug and said she was glad I finally understood, but sad about everything I'd lost. We sat at my kitchen table eating cookies while she told me about times she'd missed obvious things too. The next morning at work, I was refilling my coffee when a colleague I barely knew approached me. He glanced around to make sure we were alone, then quietly said he'd made a similar mistake years ago with a different symbol. He'd accidentally used a gang sign in a presentation without knowing what it meant. Nobody had told him directly, but he'd figured it out from people's reactions. He patted my shoulder and walked away without another word. That small moment of understanding meant more than he probably knew. Later that week, HR sent an email about new diversity and inclusion initiatives. I replied immediately, volunteering to help organize the programs. My manager acknowledged my offer with a brief nod during our team meeting, but kept his distance otherwise. I spent my lunch breaks researching training materials and best practices for the workshops. The other volunteers were polite, but careful around me, like I might say something wrong at any moment. 2 weeks after dropping off the ring, the jeweler called to confirm completion. He explained that the metal had been melted down completely and recast into simple wire. The main diamond was now in a basic pendant setting with no decorative elements. The 4 sapphires had been sold to different buyers in different states. He said the destruction was thorough and permanent, with no trace of the original design remaining. I drove to his shop and he handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was the plainest pendant I'd ever seen, with just the diamond in a simple silver setting. Holding it felt strange because it was the same stone, but everything else was gone. The weight was different and the shape was completely new. I paid the destruction fee, which was almost as much as the original ring had cost. Back home, I put the pendant in my desk drawer next to the empty ring box. During my next therapy session, Celeste had me talk about moving forward without seeking redemption. She explained that some consequences are permanent, and that's part of taking real accountability. We worked on accepting that Charlotte and her family might never forgive me. She said the goal wasn't to fix everything, but to learn and do better going forward. I nodded and took notes, but it was hard to accept that some bridges stay burned. That weekend, I researched organizations that educate about hate symbols and their impact. I found one that seemed legitimate and made an anonymous donation through their website. It wasn't much money, but it felt like the right thing to do. Nobody would ever know about it, and that was okay. 3 months had passed since the breakup when I went grocery shopping on a random Tuesday evening. I was reaching for pasta sauce when I saw Charlotte at the other end of the aisle. She was looking at salad dressings with her back to me. My first instinct was to leave, but then she turned and our eyes met. We both froze for a second, then gave each other a small nod. No words or waves or attempts to approach. Just that brief acknowledgement before we both went back to our shopping. I grabbed my sauce and headed to the next aisle while she stayed where she was. The whole interaction lasted maybe 5 seconds, but it felt much longer. My hands were shaking as I finished shopping and went through checkout. In the parking lot, I sat in my car for 10 minutes before driving home. Seeing her had brought everything back, but I knew better than to think it meant anything. That nod was just 2 people who used to know each other being polite. Nothing more and nothing less. The pendant stayed in my drawer and I stopped looking at it every day. Life kept moving forward whether I wanted it to or not. I stopped trying to explain myself to people who already made up their minds about me. The guy at the coffee shop who heard about the ring from someone would give me my coffee without making eye contact. My neighbor who used to chat about sports would just nod and keep walking when we passed in the hallway. I learned to accept their cold shoulders and whispered conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. My parents started calling more often and inviting me to dinner every Sunday instead of just holidays. Mom would make my favorite pot roast and Dad would talk about work and the news, but they both watched me carefully like I might do something unexpected. The tension was still there, but softer now, like they were trying to remember who I used to be before everything happened. At work, HR moved me to a different team on the 3rd floor where most people didn't know the story yet. My new desk was by the window and faced away from the main walkway, which meant fewer people staring as they passed. The official reason was departmental restructuring, but everyone knew it was really about giving me space from the people who couldn't look at me the same way anymore. My personnel file had a permanent note about the incident that would follow me through any promotion or transfer attempts. I spent a whole weekend thinking about what to do with the pendant that used to be the ring. Finally, I wrapped it in tissue paper and put it in a small padded envelope with a note that just said it was hers to keep or throw away, with no expectations from me. I mailed it to Charlotte's parents' house since I didn't know her new address and figured they would give it to her. The post office clerk asked if I wanted tracking, but I said no because I didn't want to know if she got it or what she did with it. During my next session with Celeste, we talked about setting new goals that weren't about fixing the past, but learning to recognize problems before they got bad. She had me practice looking at situations from other people's views by describing events from their perspective instead of mine. We worked on exercises where I had to guess how someone might react to different scenarios based on their background and experiences, not my own assumptions. She said progress would be slow, but the fact I was trying meant something. A new guy named Alan started at work and didn't know anything about my history since he transferred from the Seattle office. He asked if I wanted to grab lunch at the sandwich place down the street, and I said yes, even though I knew it was only temporary before someone told him the story. We talked about normal things like the weather and sports, and for 30 minutes I felt like a regular person again. He mentioned wanting to explore the city more, and I suggested some restaurants, knowing we probably wouldn't actually go together once he learned about me. 2 weeks later, I ran into an old friend from college at the gas station who mentioned Charlotte was seeing someone new. He showed me a picture from social media of her at some event with a tall guy wearing glasses, and they both looked happy. My chest hurt seeing her smile like that, but I was glad she was moving on and finding happiness after what I put her through. The guy looked normal and kind and probably picked out a ring that didn't accidentally look like a hate symbol. My performance review came up, and my manager sat across from me with a neutral expression while going through the standard forms. He marked meets expectations for everything and said I was showing improvement in awareness and boundaries, but advancement opportunities would be limited for now. He didn't say for how long, and I didn't ask because we both knew it could be years before I got past this if I ever did. The review went in my file next to the HR incident report, where it would stay forever. I found a support group that met Thursday evenings in a church basement for people working on social awareness and perspective taking. The first meeting was hard because I had to introduce myself and explain why I was there without going into all the details. Other people shared stories about missing social cues at work or misreading situations with friends, and I realized these blind spots were more common than I thought. One woman talked about accidentally insulting her daughter-in-law's culture by bringing the wrong food to a dinner and not understanding why everyone got quiet. A man described losing a promotion because he kept interrupting female colleagues without realizing he was doing it. We all sat in a circle on metal folding chairs drinking bad coffee and trying to understand how we kept missing what seemed obvious to everyone else. The facilitator gave us homework to observe people's reactions more carefully and write down what we noticed without trying to interpret it first. 6 months after proposing with that ring, my life had shrunk down to a careful routine of work and therapy and volunteering at the food bank on Saturdays. I read books about symbols and communication and unconscious bias trying to understand how I missed something so obvious. My apartment was quiet most evenings except for the sound of pages turning or my laptop keys clicking as I did the awareness exercises Celeste assigned. It wasn't the life I planned when I bought that ring thinking Charlotte and I would be planning our wedding by now. Instead, I was learning to live with the consequences of not seeing what everyone else saw immediately and accepting that some mistakes can't be undone. My phone buzzed 3 days later with a notification from an address I didn't recognize. The message was from Mia, and seeing her name made my chest tighten. She wrote that she wanted to thank me for never blaming Charlotte publicly or making excuses online about what happened. She said she still didn't want any contact, but she appreciated that I'd respected boundaries and hadn't tried to defend myself by attacking Charlotte. I read it twice before deleting it and putting my phone away. That weekend I went through my closet and found the box of photos from our relationship that I'd shoved on the top shelf months ago. I pulled it down and looked at the stack of pictures for a minute before putting the whole box in a garbage bag without opening it. The empty ring box still sat in my dresser drawer, and I left it there as a reminder. At my next therapy session, Celeste pointed to her notes from 6 months ago and showed me the difference in how I was responding to situations now. She said I was actually pausing when people reacted strongly to things instead of immediately dismissing their responses or arguing. We practiced scenarios where someone might be upset about something I didn't understand, and I worked on asking questions instead of defending myself. The company charity auction came up the following week, and I volunteered to help set up tables instead of avoiding it like I'd done with every social event for months. People still kept their distance, but I managed basic conversations about the weather and the auction items without anyone walking away mid-sentence. My supervisor even nodded at me when I helped carry boxes to the storage room afterward. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and started writing about everything that happened. Not to post anywhere or show anyone, but just to get it out of my head and onto paper. I wrote about how someone can hurt people without meaning to, and how impact matters more than what you intended. I filled 20 pages over the next few nights trying to understand how I'd been so blind. My routine settled into something predictable after that, with work during the week and volunteering at the library on Saturdays shelving books. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I bought that ring, but it was manageable and real. People at work started including me in lunch orders again, though nobody invited me to happy hour. My parents called once a week to check in, and we talked about safe topics like the weather and their garden. I kept building back trust through small, consistent actions like showing up on time and following through on projects. In my filing cabinet, I had a folder labeled What I Didn't See, with all the documentation from the ring. The receipts from both jewelers and the photos I'd taken from every angle, and the final invoice for melting it down. Sometimes I'd pull out the folder and look at the photos trying to see it fresh, but the pattern jumped out at me now every single time. Looking at those papers reminded me that my perspective wasn't the only one that mattered, and that other people's reactions were real, even when I didn't understand them at first. 8 months after proposing with that ring, I understood that some mistakes can't be fixed or forgiven. I was alone in my apartment most nights reading or doing the awareness exercises Celeste assigned, but I wasn't angry about it anymore. The education came at a huge cost, but at least I'd learned something real about paying attention to how my actions affect other people. I kept moving forward one day at a time, carrying the weight of what I'd done, and using it to be more careful about everything I did now. And that's my side of things. But I'd love to hear yours. Would you have done the same? Leave a comment, I'll be reading.